Wyoming Territory, 1883. A broken-down rancher sees a dying nurse abandoned at a frontier railway station, and he makes a decision that changes everything. August Merritt hasn't spoken more than 10 words to another soul since a prairie fire took his wife and half his cattle herd 6 months ago. His ranch is falling apart. Creditors are circling, and he's barely hanging on. But when he sees Lenora Vale collapsed on that rain-soaked platform, barefoot, fevered, and discarded like unwanted cargo, something stirs in his chest. The conductor won't let her back on the train. The townspeople walk past. She's too weak to survive alone. So August does the unthinkable. He wraps his coat around her, lifts her into his wagon, and brings a dangerous secret home. But what happens when two broken souls try to heal each other in the unforgiving wilderness? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear is a story of love and justice you won't soon forget. The morning mist clung to the Wyoming Valley like a widow's veil, soft and gray and full of sorrow. August Merritt stood on the sagging porch of what had once been a proud ranch house, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. 6 months had passed since the fire. 6 months since the prairie wind had carried orange demons across his land, devouring everything he'd built in 23 years of marriage. The house still stood, scorched but stubborn. But the barn was gone. Half the pasture was gone. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, with her gentle laugh and flour-dusted apron. She was gone too. The silence pressed against him like a physical weight. A time existed when this land hummed with life. Now the only sounds were the wind and his own breathing, ragged and uncertain. The letter from the bank sat folded in his shirt pocket, the paper worn soft from handling. He didn't need to read it again. 3 months behind on the mortgage. Foreclosure. The words might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. Sarah would have known what to do. She always did. But Sarah was 6 feet under, and August had learned that a man could be completely lost, even on land he'd worked his entire adult life. He moved inside the house, where everything remained exactly as she had left it. Her sewing basket sat beside her favorite chair. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. He'd tried once to move her things, but his hands had trembled. He'd left everything untouched, as if preserving the scene might somehow bring her back. The wedding ring, Sarah's wedding ring, sat in a small wooden box on the mantel. He'd removed it from her finger before the burial, unable to let that piece of her disappear into the earth. Sometimes late at night, when the silence became unbearable, he'd take it out, remembering the day he'd slipped it on her finger. Now it sat silent and empty, just as he did. He'd been moving through the world like a dead man himself, going through the motions of living without any of the substance. He'd have to go to town soon. Supplies were running low. Coffee, flour, the basics. The thought filled him with a bone-deep weariness. Town meant people. People meant questions, concerned looks, awkward silences where condolences used to be. But a man had to eat, even a man who'd forgotten why eating mattered. The town of Cedar Falls had grown around the railway station like a flower around a stone. August conducted his business with mechanical efficiency. Flour, coffee, lamp oil. He met all attempts at conversation with polite nods and exact change. The rain began as he loaded his supplies into the wagon, a cold, persistent drizzle. He'd planned to head straight home, back to his exile, but his horse, Buck, chose that moment to favor his left front hoof. A stone was lodged between the shoe and hoof. Nothing serious, but it needed attention. The railway station had a covered platform where he could work dry. That's when he heard the conductor's voice, cutting through the rain and steam with bureaucratic finality. Can't have her on my train. Regulations are clear. No passengers too sick to travel. She could die before we reach Cheyenne. August glanced up. Two men in city clothes flanked a figure slumped on a wooden bench. A woman. She was so still and pale she might have been carved from wax. She paid her fare, one of the men protested, but his voice was hollow. Fare or no fare, she's not boarding, the conductor snapped. Look at her, barely breathing, running a fever. She belongs in a hospital, not on my train. August freed the stone from Buck's hoof, but found himself listening. There was something about the absolute stillness of the woman at the center of the argument. She sat with the resignation of someone who had expected nothing better. "What's wrong with her?" asked a woman in an elaborate traveling dress. "Consumption, maybe, or just plain worn out," the conductor shrugged. "Found her like this at Fort Russell. Soldiers said she used to work there, some kind of nurse, but took sick. They put her on the train west, figured she could find work in California." "The train leaves in 5 minutes," the conductor announced, pulling out his watch. The two men exchanged glances. They stepped back from the bench, distancing themselves from a problem they'd concluded wasn't worth solving. Other passengers flowed around the abandoned woman like water around a stone. The train pulled away in a cloud of smoke and cinders. The platform fell quiet except for the sound of rain. "Probably die before morning anyway," someone muttered behind August. "Not our responsibility." The voices faded. August was left with his horse and the woman, who sat as if she were part of the furniture. He told himself it wasn't his concern. He had problems enough. But something about her stillness reminded him of his own. The way a person sat when they'd accepted the world had finished with them. Before he knew what he was doing, he was walking across the platform. "Miss," his voice came out rough, rusty from disuse. "You got somewhere to go?" She studied his face. Her eyes, when they opened, were startlingly blue. "I'm afraid not," she said simply. The honesty of it hit August somewhere deep. "Got a name?" "Lenora Vale." A pause. "And you?" "August Merritt." He found himself removing his hat. "I've got a wagon and a ranch about 2 hours' ride. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." She tilted her head, studying him. "Why?" It was a fair question. "Don't rightly know," he admitted. "Just seems like the thing to do." She was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want to be a burden." "We're all burdens to somebody," August replied, surprising himself. "Question is whether we're burdens worth carrying." Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, or maybe hope. She tried to stand and would have fallen if he hadn't stepped forward to steady her. Up close, he could feel the fever radiating from her skin. He tucked his coat around her shivering form and helped her into the wagon. As he did, he saw the small leather medical bag clutched in her hand. Battered, but well maintained. He guided the wagon through the muddy streets of Cedar Falls, not knowing that this single act of kindness would reshape both their lives in ways neither could ever imagine. The ride back to the ranch passed in a haze. By the time they arrived, Lenora had slipped into a deep, fever-driven sleep. August carried her inside. She weighed almost nothing. He settled her on the old horsehair sofa where Sarah used to sit. The comparison struck him like a physical blow. For a moment, the weight of what he'd done crashed down on him. What did he know about nursing? But Lenora stirred, her eyes opening with that same startling alertness. "Your ranch," she remembered. "Rest is what you need," he said gruffly, building up the fire. He retrieved a heavy quilt from his mother's old cedar chest, Sarah's favorite, and spread it over her. "This is very kind," she said, her voice stronger now. "Don't even know you," he grunted, uncomfortable. "Sometimes that makes things simpler." Her gaze was peculiar, intense. "You've lost someone recently." It wasn't a question. What makes you say that? The way you move through your own house, she said simply. Like you're trying not to disturb something that's no longer there. He turned back to the fire. My wife, 6 months ago. I'm sorry, she said, and the words held a genuine understanding. Was she ill? Fire, he said curtly. The word was a raw wound. Lenora was quiet. Then, I've seen fire. Different kind, but fire all the same. It changes everything it touches, doesn't it? Before he could ask what she meant, her eyes had drifted closed again. He was left with an unexpected problem. He had no idea how to care for her. He had no soup, no medicine, nothing suitable for an invalid. As if sensing his dilemma, her eyes opened again. If you have any willow bark, I could make tea. It would help with the fever. You're a nurse, he remembered. Was, she corrected. Trained at the military hospital in St. Louis, served at frontier posts for several years before. She gestured vaguely. Before this. What happened? Her expression grew guarded. I took ill. Consumption, they thought. When I couldn't perform my duties, they discharged me. Medical unfitness, they called it. The bitterness in her voice was carefully controlled, but he heard it. Their loss, he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You might be right about that. He tended the fire while she dozed, and slowly the afternoon gave way to evening. The small acts of care awakened something in him he'd thought long dead. Not love, but purpose. He knew he'd have to ride to town again, face the questions that would come. Preacher Morrison would inquire about the propriety of the arrangements. The whole thing was complicated. But looking at Lenora, breathing easier now, he didn't regret his decision. The morning brought unexpected complications. He found her in the kitchen, attempting to make coffee, a determined set to her shoulders. You should be resting, he said. I should be useful, she replied firmly. You saved my life, August. The least I can do is try to improve yours. She gestured toward the window. I noticed you have some cattle that look poorly, the spotted one especially. He was surprised she'd noticed. Bessie, his best milk cow, had been acting strangely for days. You know about cattle medicine. I know about bodies, she said simply. Human, bovine. The principles are similar. Against his better judgment, he helped her to the paddock. In 10 minutes, she had diagnosed a problem that had been troubling him for days. A blockage. Under her direction, he prepared the treatment, watching as she coaxed the reluctant cow to accept the medicine with a gentleness that reminded him of Sarah. Frontier posts don't always have veterinarians, she explained. I learned to adapt. As her strength returned, she began to make small improvements all around the ranch. She reorganized his medical supplies, harvested the herbs in Sarah's abandoned garden, and somehow coaxed his chickens into laying again. One afternoon, he found her in the garden with Sarah's old spade. August felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but Lenora's reverence for the tool made the moment bearable. Sarah always said good tools were like good friends, he found himself saying. She was right, Lenora said, her thumb tracing the worn handle. Would it trouble you if I tried to restore it? He'd assumed the garden would remain a monument to Sarah's absence, but watching Lenora, he realized Sarah would have wanted it to live. She'd like that, he said. Sarah always said gardens were meant for the living. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. That evening, by the fire, Lenora asked the question that had been hanging between them. What happens when I'm well, when I'm strong enough to travel again? The truth was, he'd grown accustomed to having her there. Don't know, he admitted. Suppose that's up to you. I have nowhere to go, she said finally. I could stay if you'd have me. Earn my keep helping with the ranch. Maybe start a small medical practice. August considered the practicalities. the gossip, the complications. But he also thought about Bessie, now fully recovered, about the garden showing signs of new life, about the way the silence felt less oppressive. Might work, he said carefully, if you're sure it's what you want. Her smile was the first truly radiant expression he'd seen. I'm sure, more sure than I've been about anything in a very long time. It was while organizing the papers in Sarah's old desk that Lenora made the discovery that would change everything. She'd been looking for seed catalogs when her fingers found a hidden drawer panel. Behind it was a small bundle of documents. Military discharge papers. Her discharge papers. The ones the army said were lost. "August," she called, her voice carrying an odd tension. "Could you come here?" He found her at the desk, the papers spread before her. Her face was pale with something that looked like fear. "These are my official discharge documents," she said, her hands trembling. "Do you understand what this means?" It meant she could prove her 7 years of distinguished service. It meant she could access her pension, clear her name. It meant she had options. She pulled out a particular document, a commendation. "This is from the Battle of Little Wind River. I performed field surgery under fire for 18 straight hours. Saved 37 men. They called me indispensable." This wasn't the record of someone discharged for unfitness. This was the record of a hero. "If you had all this," he asked, "why did they let you go?" Her expression darkened. "Because I treated Confederate prisoners with the same care I gave Union soldiers. Because I refused to let wounded men die based on the color of their uniform." He felt a cold anger build in his chest. "So they drummed you out on false medical grounds. They said I was suffering from nervous exhaustion, that I was mentally unstable." Her voice was bitter. "And now," she turned from the window, "now I have proof of what really happened. I could appeal my discharge, demand reinstatement." August understood. The woman he'd rescued was not a broken invalid. She was a decorated veteran, a skilled surgeon. She didn't need him. She had a future that went far beyond his failing ranch. "What will you do?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to fight, but another part," she looked around the room, "another part of me wonders if I've already found something better than vindication." She leaned forward, her eyes bright. "I could establish a proper medical practice here. You could expand the cattle operation. With 2 incomes, we could make this place profitable again." The vision was seductive, but there were complications. "People will talk," he said. "Unmarried woman living on a bachelor's ranch." Her expression grew thoughtful. "There are ways to address that concern." The implication hung in the air. "You'd be willing to make it legal?" he asked carefully. "A marriage of convenience." "I'd be willing to make it real," she said quietly. "If you were." The words hit August like a physical blow. A new marriage felt like a betrayal of everything he'd shared with Sarah. "I love my wife," he said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "I know," she replied gently, "and I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I'm asking if you think you could learn to love me too." He stood and walked to the mantel, where Sarah's wedding ring still sat in its small box. "I don't know if I can," he admitted. "Maybe the question," she said softly, "is whether Sarah would want you to spend the rest of your life alone." He thought about Sarah's generous heart. She would have liked Lenora. She would have appreciated her competence, her kindness. "She'd want me to be happy," he said finally. "Then maybe that's where we start," Lenora suggested. He looked at the woman beside him. Strong, intelligent, kind. It wouldn't be like it was with Sarah. "No," she agreed. "It would be something entirely different. But different doesn't necessarily mean lesser." The fever returned on a Tuesday morning, striking Lenora with the sudden violence of a summer storm. August found her collapsed in the kitchen. As he carried her to the sofa, Her medical bag tumbled from her fingers, spilling its contents across the floor. Among the scattered vials, something caught his eye. A leather portfolio hidden in a secret compartment. He pulled out the documents, and what he read changed everything. The first was a commission dated just 2 years past. Colonel Lenora Vale, Chief Medical Officer, Fort Laramie. Not a nurse, a full colonel. The second document made his blood run cold. A warrant for her arrest, signed by General Marcus Sheridan himself. The charges: treason, theft of military supplies, and desertion. The bounty: $500, enough to save his ranch. The woman he'd agreed to marry was a wanted fugitive. When her fever broke that evening, August was waiting, the documents spread on the table. "Colonel," he said, the title heavy with accusation. "Yes," she said, struggling to sit up. "I was a colonel." "The warrant says you're a deserter and a thief." "The warrant says many things," she replied, her voice steady. "Most of them are lies." The story she told was not of cowardice, but of courage. Last spring, a cholera outbreak among the Lakota near Fort Laramie. The Army's official position: let it run its course. "I'd taken an oath to heal," she said, her eyes blazing. "Not to choose who deserved healing based on the color of their skin. I took medical supplies that were sitting unused while people died. I rode into Lakota territory and spent 6 weeks saving lives." And the desertion charge. "While I was gone, a cavalry patrol was ambushed. 3 soldiers died. The Army needed someone to blame." August studied her face, reading the truth in her eyes. "So you ran." "I was given a choice: face a court-martial on trumped-up charges, or disappear quietly. I chose to live." The silence stretched between them. "The bounty," August said. $500, enough to save your ranch." "I know what you're thinking, August. I know what choice makes sense." He looked at the warrant, the official seals that could solve all his financial problems. Then he looked at the woman who'd saved his cow, tended his wife's garden, and brought his house back to life. A woman who risked her career to save children. "They'll come looking for you," he said. "Eventually, yes. Military manhunters are thorough." Her shoulders straightened. "I won't ask you to risk everything for me. If you turn me in, I'll understand." He walked to the window, staring out at the land he'd worked for decades. $500 would pay the bank, save the cattle, secure his future. All he had to do was send a telegram. But he thought of Sarah, who'd never turned away someone in need, who'd taught him that character was measured not by convenience, but by choices made when no one was watching. "The wedding," he said finally, "would have to be called off." "Of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I can't marry you under false pretenses." He turned from the window, his decision made. "What if we moved it up? What if we married tomorrow?" She stared at him in shock. "August, you can't be serious. You know what I am now. What kind of danger?" "I know you're the woman who risked her career and freedom to save children who weren't your responsibility," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "I know you're brave and honest, and exactly the kind of person Sarah would have wanted me to find. They'll come for me. Then we'll face that when it happens, together." He knelt beside the sofa, taking her hands. "Marry me, Lenora. Not as some woman running from the law, but as 2 people who found something worth protecting in each other." Tears ran down her cheeks. "You could lose everything." "I've already lost everything once," he replied. "Surviving that taught me that the only things worth having are the ones worth risking everything for." The marriage took place the next morning in Preacher Morrison's small study. The ink was barely dry on the certificate when the first stranger appeared in town, a military man asking questions about a woman matching Lenora's description. That evening, they sat at their kitchen table, preparing for a fight. "They'll come at dawn," Lenora said with military certainty. Standard doctrine. 3 or 4 men, spread to cover all exits. How long do we have? A day, maybe 2. They'll scout the area first. She looked at him, her eyes steady. It's not too late, August. You could say I deceived you. Not happening, he said firmly. We're in this together now. The sound of hoofbeats in the yard sent them both reaching for their weapons. But it was their neighbor, Tom Brennan. Got word you might be having visitors, he said grimly. Wanted you to know there's folks who don't appreciate military men harassing their neighbors. Me and the boys will be keeping an eye on things. As they finished their preparations, moving supplies to the barn, Lenora made her confession. The charges against me, she said, her voice steady. They're not entirely false. I did take supplies without authorization. I did abandon my post. In the strictest legal sense, I am guilty. He moved to stand before her. Do you regret it? No, she answered without hesitation. I saved 43 lives, August. If that makes me a criminal, then I'll wear the label proudly. Then that's all I need to know. He cupped her face in his hands. Sarah always said, when choosing between what's legal and what's right, you choose what's right and accept the consequences. I love you for that, she whispered. I love you too, he replied, surprised by how easily the words came. Different than what I had with Sarah, but no less real. They came with the first light of dawn, 4 men on horseback. August Merritt, the lead rider, called out. We know you're harboring a fugitive. Send out Colonel Lenora Vale, and no one needs to get hurt. August remained silent in the barn loft, his Winchester steady. The officer signaled his men, who began to spread out. That's far enough, son, August called to the first soldier approaching the barn. Show yourself. We have legal authority here. This is my land, August replied, his voice echoing. Wyoming law applies here, and it requires proper warrants. Unless you've got papers signed by a territorial judge, you best stay off my property. The officer, tired of negotiation, gave the order. Stevens, check the house. Morrison, secure the barn. We're done talking. August's first shot was a warning, splintering wood above the young soldier's head. The morning exploded into violence. Bullets whined through the loft. August, Lenora called from below. North window, second man approaching. August fired again, this time to wound. The second soldier, Morrison, cried out, clutching his shoulder. From the house came the sound of breaking glass. The officer and his remaining man were forcing entry. Just then, Tom Brennan and 3 other ranchers rode into view, armed and ready. Military boys, Tom's voice boomed. This is local law. Cease fire. The officer appeared in the doorway. This is federal business. Stand down. Show me your federal warrant, Tom replied, his rifle trained. From below, Lenora's voice was urgent. Morrison's hit badly. He'll bleed out. Let me help him, she called to the young soldier, Stevens. I'm a doctor. Stay back, Stevens shouted, his voice cracking. But Lenora was already moving, her medical bag in one hand, a white cloth in the other. It was exactly the kind of courage that had gotten her into this mess. Colonel Vale, the officer called from the house. Surrender now, and your husband won't be charged. Go to hell, August shouted back. The arrival of Sheriff Blake from town changed everything. What in hell is going on here? He demanded. The officer puffed out his chest. Sheriff, we're here on federal business. With what documentation? Blake interrupted. Because I've got complaints about armed men terrorizing local citizens, and that falls under my jurisdiction. Sheriff, August called from the loft. I've got their wounded man here, and my wife is treating him. These men came onto my property with guns, no warrants, making threats. Blake nodded grimly. That's your right under territorial law. He turned to the officer. "Unless you've got proper documentation, you're trespassing. I'm ordering you to stand down." The officer's face reddened. "This woman is a fugitive from military justice." "Then bring me proper extradition papers," Blake said firmly. "Until then, she's a territorial citizen under my protection." The marriage certificate, their salvation. Military law had no jurisdiction over civilian marriages. As Lenora worked to save a soldier's life and legal arguments flew over their heads, August realized their desperate gamble was working. Spring arrived early that year. The legal battles took months, but in the end, the military dropped the charges. It was politically difficult to prosecute a woman who'd become known throughout the territory as the Angel of Cedar Falls. The ranch prospered. It became a place of healing for both bodies and souls. August stood on his porch in the pre-dawn light, watching the sunrise. The view was the same, but he was a different man. Lenora emerged from the house, her medical bag in hand. "Early call," he said. "Mrs. Henderson's baby is coming," she replied, settling beside him on the porch swing. "But I have something very important to come home to." They sat in comfortable silence. "Any regrets?" he asked, the ritual question between them. "Only one," she replied. "I regret that it took almost dying to find you." He reached for her hand, Sarah's ring catching the light. The sight no longer brought pain, only a sense of continuity. "Speaking of finding things," Lenora said. She pulled out a newly carved wooden sign. "Merritt Ranch, August and Lenora Est, 1883. Cattle, horses, and medical services." Their names were linked, a declaration of partnership, of shared dreams. "Sounds like a lot of work," he said. "The best things usually are," she replied. "Are you willing to try?" A year ago, he'd been a broken man waiting to die. Now he was married to a remarkable woman, contemplating a future filled with potential. "I'm willing," he said finally. More than willing. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley. The same railway that had brought both tragedy and salvation. But August no longer flinched. Some trains brought sorrow, others brought hope. The difference lay in the choices people made. He'd made his choice, and it had made all the difference. If you believe that even the most broken hearts can find a way to heal, hit that like button and subscribe. The frontier was full of second chances for those brave enough to find them. Tell us in the comments, what do you think is the true meaning of home? Thanks for watching.